Oh, we're very happy to have Sule give the first keynote lecture to end this day. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, guys, for inviting me to this talk. And I know all of you are very tired now. It was a very productive, tired day. And then hopefully at the end of this, you will think it's kind of worthwhile to sit through this. When I thought about what to talk about today, I actually gave a lot of thought to it. In the end, I decided instead of giving a single paper, I decided to give a blended talk about an agenda. And I'm going to provide a lot of evidence from children. And that's dear to me at the moment in terms of what I'm doing. So this is going to be about how we build social capital, how we harness the social psychology using public school as the ideal platform. So just to give you motivation why this is an important question and why I feel so passionate about this. I hope I can actually relay that passion to you today. We rely on cooperation to survive and thrive collectively. I mean, we are social animals. And if we did not believe that, this whole pandemic disaster actually told us so. So you saw at the beginning of the pandemic, Italians sing the national anthem on their balconies, and a year later they were on the street trying to kill their government officials for locking them down. So we can't do this very long. We cannot be isolated very long because our individual achievement is defined by our social bonding. Our collective achievement is of course also collective achievement depends on our social bonding in the communities that we live in. So we all pursue our individual interests, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's what we do. But we have a better chance of success, in the evolutionary sense, survival, when we cooperate with others. So we could do this. We could do individually better, socially definitely better, when we cooperate, when we actually trust each other, when we have the prosociality built within any group setting that we're talking about. So the prosperity, economic prosperity, and in the end, I'm going to show a little bit in the end of the talk, the social justice and equality actually requires our environments to be cohesive and non-toxic in terms of our relationship with the other human beings. So by cohesive, what I mean in any group setting, this could be a school, which I'm going to talk about, this could be firms that I also work in, and community or countries. By cohesive, we mean, we think about several indicators of a cohesive environment. And one of them is, of course, the degree of social connectedness in a group and the collective will to thrive and succeed together. This could be a teamwork in a team in a corporation, a classroom under the leadership of a teacher, or a community under the leadership of the community leader. Level of prosociality also defines how cohesive an environment is. So by prosociality, what we mean is all the stuff that comes from the prosocial psychology as to how much we trust each other, how much we reciprocate each other's trust, how much we cooperate and tolerate the other person's differences. But not just to tolerate the other person's differences, to be friends with the person and interact with the person who's actually different from us. So also these environments highlight the cohesive environments highlight the absence of intergroup and intergroup conflict environments. And of course, absence of any ethnic, racial, religious, and socioeconomic segregation. So anytime you see the opposite, you see actually go toward a more non-cohesive and toxic environment. So there is huge literature on, I'm not going to put a literature slide here. So there's a huge literature, correlation of literature that shows trust, cooperation, social cohesion is positively correlated with economic prosperity. and also inequality in the expected way. Yet non-cohesive environments emerge, non-cohesive groups emerge, non-cohesive school emerge, some non-cohesive toxic firms emerge in terms of human relationship and countries. So they may have different reasons, okay? So like in the US, there's deep historical roots for the racial inequality and racial discord, and then ongoing conflicts. There are other places like deep fault lines, historical fault lines, religious fault lines, ethnic fault lines. That could happen, and a lot of anthropologists and economic historians actually look at that kind of work. That study those kind of historical phenomena, but they also, I'm just gonna try to convince you that also may arise, these non-cohesive environments and settings may arise in a very socio-economically, socio-politically difficult times, and in particular, I'm gonna highlight in the case of mass migratory flows. So when something happens in a country, and a lot of people start moving to the other country, affecting the other country's social fabric. And that happens when the differences in proximity to cultures are larger. So the Europeans are not as affected in terms of their social fabric and their social capital by the inflow from Ukrainians, because the proximity of the culture and religion and all that stuff is there. But when they were scared to death when the Syrians start moving and when stuff comes from Africa, right? So it's all about like fear of losing the existing social capital when there is this new and unknown come to your place. So that's all that the sphere of your existing social capital might be collapsing. Okay? So in those cases are inevitable, and it is happening, and it will happen with the climate change a lot more. Right? We will expect, all the projections are showing that maybe not more conflict in the world, but maybe more conflict driven by the climate change and extreme weather events. So in those cases, you may need economic and social policies to achieve or restore the public you desire, re-engineer the public you want in the way that is cohesive and non-toxic and conflict-free. So I'm just going to argue, I'm starting really from the big picture and moving toward where I want to move. So for this, I'm going to argue that the low-hanging fruit is within children, because all of the research in the last 20 years show that if you want to engineer the public you want and establish a social capital in the way you want, the obvious place to go are the schools, the public schooling system. And that was the whole idea of public schooling in the first place, right? So the public education is the ideal platform to engineer the public we want, because the schools are not just, and the COVID closures showed us, that schools are not just places and settings that you actually transfer knowledge from one generation to the other, but also where we instill the civic virtues in our children, we teach for sociality, we build our social capital in these settings. That's what we do. And the schools do this, not just in addition to teaching kids maths and verbal skills and other skills that we call human capital, but schools build our collective character. And the way we structure them will tell us what kind of public in the end we will have. So, and there's so much research, and so many people in this audience know the childhood period offers tremendous opportunities to shape the social and emotional skills and the cognitive skills and the human capital. What I'm going to focus on here is our collective character, that is the social capital. because we know the neuroplasticity of the brain is very high in the childhood period. In the same way, you can actually do the opposite. You can actually create, you can actually instill undesirable beliefs into children as well, like stereotypes, like racism. You can do that at this stage. So because this goes both ways. And in the past, the history is full of those examples. So what the COVID period also showed us that yes, the character building goes on in the school, but those opportunities are, especially school opportunities, especially important for the low socioeconomic. Because what happens is I teach my child to how to trust the others, how to cooperate, how to be altruistic toward the others. You will do, but at the low socioeconomic strata, those opportunities are also limited. So you call it parental ability, you call it parental resources, but the parents usually, these type of parents usually lack this ability to develop these skills in their children. So public education is especially important for the low socioeconomic strata, not just for the human capital effects that we see in all sorts of COVID papers that show that these kids, lower socioeconomic kids, fell behind big time in maths, in language scores and all. And in a companion paper, mine is coming, they also now lack character a lot more than the wealthy parents' children. They're more impulsive, they're less gritty, they're less empathetic. They have less IQ now, right? So with the long school closures. So schools are particularly important for these kids. Since we all know schools offer an ideal setting to build social capital, they are also the platforms to reinforce the very problem we are trying to solve. They can actually be really bad for this group of children. So the challenges of governing ethnically diverse communities with conflict and intolerance actually apply to managing schools that are located in these neighborhoods. Because what happens is they actually mirror their neighborhood. The schools in violent neighborhoods with lots of ethnic or religious tensions are actually very similar to what their neighborhoods, and those in many settings become a recruitment ground for radical groups. Schools are great places to recruit radicalism and also other bad habits like drugs and all that stuff. So it can go always two ways, and that's why the policy is very, very important here. What you want to do with your public schools, how you want to target your low SES kids is very, very important for the public you desire. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use Turkey as my ideal laboratory to study inter-ethnic cohesion in particular. I'm going to look at the ethnic diversity that's caused by a big shock, created tensions, created more conflict, created non-cohesive environment. And I'm just going to offer some remedies that work. And some other remedies we are studying now, whether they work or not. So Turkey has been a diverse country ethnically, and a lot of religious factions also. So Turkey had its own fault line all through the history. So the influx of Syrian refugees beginning March 2011, at the start of the Syrian civil war, was a big shock to Turkey. Turkey was never a refugee country. So, and this was not like any refugee shock. It was like right now, about 4 million Syrians live in Turkey. This was a big shock, and with the arrangement with EU, Turkey had this program to hold them in Turkey at any cost, right? So that actually, I'll show you, creates a lot of tensions within the country. So Not only that, the EU and Turkey made an agreement on refugee children and placing them into the public schools. Wherever they're registered as refugees, they were entitled to go to, actually they were encouraged to go to the next public school. So this was a huge shock, not just the inflow, the labor market, this, that, it was just huge shock to Turkey, but also the Turkish public education system was a huge shock. So it changed the ethnic composition in the public schools in a very, very short period of time without any preparation whatsoever for the teachers, for the schools, or for the parents of the host children. So this was a shock, huge shock. So what we are doing now, we are still, it's an ongoing work. We are working in communities. I mean, they are all over the place now, mostly in Istanbul now, right? Because this is where the jobs are, and there is not much restriction going on where the refugee can settle. But around these communities, the shock is the biggest, because that's where Syria is, right? So, and the influx is here, and there are also jobs here, and the cultural proximity is there. Just to give you maybe you don't know, the cultural proximity is close, I say, but I don't know if you know, but the Arabic and Turkish are two distinct languages. So the Turkish is a very, very difficult language for a non-Turk. So these people come with either mainly Arabic and some of them with Kurdish. But since Kurdish is not spoken in Turkey, it's forbidden, so it's only Turkish. When they go to school, they speak zero Turkish. So the teacher has all of a sudden these maybe 3, 4 kids, later on 10 kids, speaking zero Turkish. So teacher has to deal with this. This is what the situation was in 2016 when the school placement program started. So we work in these communities. At the beginning, we collected data of over 10,000 children, all public schools, all public primary schools, and about 400 teachers from about 200 elementary schools, mainly disadvantaged areas where the refugees actually place themselves. And we collected very rich information from students. We looked at all the administrative records of violence, student reports and teacher reports and official reports. We collected support networks among children, so we can get at the social exclusion, ethnic segregation. I will show you. We, of course, got a lot of measure about prosociality to incentivize games of trust, cooperation, altruism, what have you. And then, of course, we test the children, their IQ, their emotional IQ, their empathy, their achievement, so on and so forth. We also measure teachers a lot, right? So we have their demographics qualifications, paper qualifications, but also we test their IQ, EQ, all of that stuff, and their style, their beliefs, their motivation, their gender attitudes, their ethnic attitudes, and I'm going to talk about their ethnic bias mostly, and how the integration efforts, building social capital efforts, kind of depends what kind of teacher you're looking at. And no parents here, simply because they're difficult. So when you look at the general picture, this is 2018. The inflow was still happening. We see a general deterioration of the school climate. There was more violence, there was already segregation, and there is already lower learning quality for the host and for the refugees already. Okay? But also there is these beliefs were emerging, right? So despite the fact that there was no difference in the IQ, the innate IQ, which we measure, so there is no difference between innate IQ of the refugee child and the Turkish child, right? Or the Kurdish child in those areas. Okay, 36% of the host children in the refugees are not smart at all. Simple. This is normal because they're kids. If you take your kid and introduce another kid, can't speak their language, the kid thinks there's something wrong with this kid. You know, that they're at that age. So that's not surprising. And also,
is 36 a high number or a low number? I think, how should I think about that?
I don't know, because there is no other number that I can compare this. So, what I'm saying is, this is not correct, because they are the same in terms of what we think what the smart is. So also this, there is no difference in the behavioral conduct officially we receive. It's not like the refugee children engage in more violence, or in fact, quite the opposite. At the beginning, they were very, very scared. They're little, they're scared, they're hiding, and the host children think, a lot of host children think they are badly behaved. Again, not speaking the language. Okay? So what is really disturbing is this. So these beliefs are internalized by the refugee children themselves. Even though, of course, I tell you, there is no difference in IQ and a capacity to learn, 46, almost half the refugee children believe that it's true they are not as smart as host children. They're not smart. They can't learn anything, right? So this is all internalized, and also it will affect their future learning trajectories. Yes.
There heterogeneity when you survey them, that is when they describe?
Yeah, there is big time. So right now, actually, we get them. They don't even remember they came from another country, right? So their Turkish is perfect, but they're completely segregated. They have this identity issues emerging. And there's segregation much more serious in Turkey than I measure them. I'm going to show you some segregation measures. It all changed by now.
And they still beliefs the same, like they may arrive with beliefs that they're just.
No. They have different anger. They have anger issues now, right? So they don't believe they are. These were. They are like about 9, yeah, at the age. And later on, they are now in the middle school, moving into high school. They are very different guys right now.
Okay. It might be nice as a benchmark to just have the refugees' children responding to the same question about other refugee children.
There are no other refugee children in this setting, actually. They're all Syrian.
Sorry. So when you say refugee children, you're saying there's just they're spread out in a way where there wouldn't be a peer. Is that what you mean?
What's that? So in these settings, there's the host children and the ones who come from Syria. That's what we have.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd love to understand just, I don't know how kids are am I less marked or is my group?
Oh, okay. The way we ask is the people from other countries. People who come from other countries. That's how it's asked. Yeah, people who come from other countries. Sorry about that. And because we didn't want to say Syrian or anything like that, so you need to be careful about that. So that they would know. At the time, they knew they came from other country. Right now, it's interestingly they don't consider themselves coming from another country, which is good in a way, but they also feel still different. So that's very sad. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking in terms of contextualized comparison. Is it people from other countries are less smart than me, or people from other countries are less smart than other people from my country? Was it in comparison to themselves? Or
no, they're comparing the people from other countries are not as smart as oh yeah, okay, so here they know they are, the refugee children know they are from other country. At the moment, it was made very salient to them. It prevented that later on. So what they know here is we are asking about them compared to the host children. They view the host children as very smart, unapproachable people. Just like in this graph I'm going to show you. Okay, so I'm just going to come to that graph. Okay, so we just, at that point, we needed good strategies to fix all of this. This was going the direction that is not very good. Right, so these kids were under danger. They were in danger, basically, becoming victim of violence, and the segregation could cause a lot more problems for even the host children. So also right now we are seeing the learning environment was so bad that the host children are not doing well either, because of the frustrated teachers, quitting teachers, and teachers with mental health problems and also so on and so forth. Because what happened in the end, they just couldn't manage. They couldn't manage to disperse them nicely. At the beginning, we were saying, okay, one teacher cannot handle more than 3-4 kids in the classroom. That's the tops, right? But in the end, they just could not manage to flow. So you go to a classroom, you have 10 of them with the 20 host children. And the teacher is not teaching anymore, just managing the classroom.
So if we can postpone this, it's part of the intervention, but there's nothing about the supply of Syrian teachers, right? Because
no, they are not. Turkey doesn't use them as official teachers. They use them as helpers on the side, but they are not, because they don't speak Turkish.
sure, but that's right. So they don't speak Turkish, so they might not be able to translate. I'm just thinking of like those.
They do have one Syrian teacher in every school. Often we have no idea what they do, right? So they sometimes translate problems, trauma, but they are not teaching staff. And not knowing Turkish is a big barrier, of course, for them.
What class? I mean, class sizes are going up
About 25, 30.
and they're going rising.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, like so. What sort of magnitude are we talking about?
So we are talking about right now, what they are doing now, instead of, because there's a mandate, you can't go really high, they're opening new classrooms. So the schools are enlarging more than the class sizes.
Right, but that took a while. That's taken a while to do.
That didn't actually, they adapted quite well, right? So they closed the library, they made a new classroom or something like that. But we don't see like a 40, 50 kid classroom now, because the teacher is already at the limit, right? So it's very, very hard. So what could you do? We could do lots of things. We could actually have some curricular approaches to this problem. We could have some teacher and pedagogical approaches. And all the bolded ones are actually approaches we're trying right now. So we are attacking from every direction to this problem. And the problem is getting worse and worse. Okay. So one of the things I'm going to show you now that how important the teacher is in terms of building social cohesion in an ethnically diverse environment, how the ethnically biased teacher is really, really bad for an environment like this. Okay, so teachers' ethnic bias is a significant impediment to effective integration policies here. And question is, we don't know how teachers' ethnic prejudice. So the Syrians come, I don't like the Syrian children, and how do they shape the inter-ethnic relationship of the children? So one of the questions we ask is, to understand the segregation, the kids not being friends with each other, what is the role of teacher in this? So how come the Syrians are hanging out with Syrians and the host is hanging out with hosts? And what's the role of the teacher for this? And how come in the same school, I see this? In the same school, I see a classroom like this and a classroom like this. Side by side, grade 3. Both of them are grade 3 from the same club, from the same school. So the green kids are the host and the orange ones are the Syrians. And what is this? This is a network map. This is a friendship network map. Okay, so we simply go into the classrooms and ask the kids, who's your 3 best friends in this classroom, right? And they just say, Barbara, Marco, Basit are my friends. Okay, they may not reciprocate your friendship because it's all maybe it's all in your head, but you see the arrows going to nominations. So we took these are two similar class sizes. You can actually see the class size here. Yeah. So what we see here is relatively integrated classroom versus a segregated classroom. Okay. So and then we can measure this. So the network guys measure with this what we call the Homophily Index. So Homophily Index is the host to the degree to which the host hang out with each other, and the refugees do the same. And here you see a lot of segregation with numbers. Higher numbers meaning higher segregation within it. If you think about two groups, this group and that group, holding on to each other. Okay, so we see this. Same school, same socioeconomic backgrounds, similar parents, everything is similar. Okay, so what do we do here? We explored the natural experiment, and this natural experiment being the Syrian inflow, and the features of the Turkish public education system, which is great, right? So the kids come randomly assigned to the teachers within a school, right? So we could just look at any particular teacher's effect on the socialization choices of the kids. So basically what we are doing here, take all the teacher qualities and isolate the teacher's ethnic bias as much as possible and look at the effect of that on the friendship choice of the host and the refugees. Okay, so what happens here is we have first grader randomly assigned, we have 73 primary school students analysis, 200 teachers and over 500 students, grade 2, 3, and 4. Yeah.
So the refugees are introducing classes that have already spent 1 year.
More, some of them more, some of them in 2018. Maximum was about 2 years. Honestly, when I was in the classroom measuring these, there were kids still coming. This kid is new, today he's starting, I saw those. They're just sitting there. So they were still coming.
No, I'm just wondering how much is the, can you say that it's the effect of the teacher rather than characteristics of that classroom?
No, we do have the characteristics of the classroom, and then because they are all randomly assigned, so the kids come and they are nicely distributed the classrooms within a school. So you don't see a school that 10 kids in one classroom and 1 kid in the other classroom. There is no such thing, right? So, but you see high refugee schools and low refugee schools for sure. But and the teachers are centrally appointed to those schools, so it has nothing to do with the
No,
teacher.
but I mean, the good teacher could also have spent already some time with these kids, and so the kids are also better. So
Right, so we try to control for the good teacher effect as well. So this is the isolation of that ethnic bias part, right? We measure a lot of things about the teacher. Yes.
Both the Turkish and the Syrian.
Yeah, into the classroom. Yeah. So we measure, yeah.
I completely understand that the randomization happens at the teacher level, but from your experience in this context, should we think of the primary treatment within schools as happening at the teacher level, or are there other important factors, school level, parental involvement, things like this, that we think could be just like as important, equally more important?
So what I'm going to look at here is the kid exposed to a teacher A rather than teacher B, right? And that's the factor I'm going to look at. And with the school fixed effects there, school is going to capture all the neighborhood effects and why your parents live there in the first place and everything. Is there any other factor you think of here is that could be confounding this?
Not at the teacher level. No. I'm trying to understand. So, like if you were studying the private sector here, the question of like, is a company just a collection of managers, or is it the company culture that really matters, and the managers are sort of just following company culture? So, to the extent that we're seeing some, we should just think of the effect of a particular teacher as a small portion of the overall kind of way that they're trained to behave and the culture that they end up basically.
You mean the school culture?
Exactly.
So that's why we have within school variation. That's important. So the only variation I'm exploiting here is within school.
No,
so the school culture is important, yeah. So imagine that in the same school, 2 different teachers.
I guess the question is how much variation is there across schools?
Across schools, very little in the setting, because they're all similar public schools in these communities. We pick them accordingly, right? There is no, for example, they're all low districts. So, and they're all part of the refugee placement program. So in that sense, so across school variation in most of our studies I show you is very little. But within school, the kids are different. They're very different.
I just had your motivation in mind when I was asking this, because I'm trying to think of like, you know, it might be hard to change individual teacher characteristics, something like this. And if I try to think of like what impact, at what level I would want to do a school intervention, is it going to be randomizing students to a small set of teachers, or is it going to be randomizing students?
Let me tell you some remedies here that work, and you'll see. So this won't tell you what to do, but it will tell you to choose the teacher nicely and better. But the union is going to say no, go away. We won't do that. So that's external margin shutdown. But internal margin, I'm going to show you an intervention that actually works all through.
I have a question. When were these measures elicited? The timing of when were these ethnic bias measures, as well as the student outcome?
Reverse causality, you want to know the, yeah.
I just want to know the timing.
So the timing is at the beginning of the term.
I see.
Teacher was already exposed to some of the students, right? So, but what we do test what happens with this measure. This is if you don't know, this is some implicit dissociation bias test for teachers. So what you could do is, because it was a really opportune moment for us. In 2018, they were coming. Some teachers were scheduled to get them, but haven't. So we could see what the exposure does to the teachers' ethnic bias, and we see no difference across, right? A teacher with 5 refugees, no different from teacher 2 with 2 refugees, teacher with 0 refugees yet. At this moment, we could not do this exercise because they all have refugees. Every school has refugees in its communities. Not one school is missing actually. So this is real variation across teachers, real variation. And what we're going to look at is the effect of this measure on kids' socialization efforts, friendship choices, and social exclusion of refugees, achievement, bullying, all that stuff. How the teacher, what kind of a role the teacher plays in all these bad the non-cohesion indicators. Yeah.
I guess one question that I guess you could tell us a bit more maybe is this, maybe it depends on which students you happen to get, right? So, I mean, maybe I get 3 refugees and you get 3 refugees, but just by chance, the 3 refugees that I get are very different from the 3 refugees you get, how much that could move this kind of teacher bias.
Yeah, but so you have 200 teachers all randomly distributed to classrooms. So it's this result cannot be driven by that cannot be driven by all the not biased teachers facing all the good kids and then getting the results. It's clearly some biased teachers with the bad kids and some unbiased. It's a biased teacher with the good kids and vice versa. So I think the randomization across teachers and within the school, the kids, fixes a lot of problems here. Also, I'll show you also control for a lot of teacher effects. So other teacher qualities actually. So the first set of results. So I'm just going to show you the effect of teacher ethnic bias on the friendship networks. And but the thing is, we control here for teachers' IQ, teachers' paper qualifications, teachers' national test scores, teachers' motivation, teachers. Even we ask the teachers, if you were born again, would you be teacher again? Kind of questions. And you know what? That predicts everything, rather than their IQ. That's what I'm saying. It's just a major predictor of how much they love the profession they're in, and how much passionate they are for their job, despite this shock. They were all tired in this shock. Anyways, what you see here is 3 domains of social connections. We ask the kids, who are your friends? We ask the kids who give you emotional support. We ask them, like, who do you go to when you're very, very sad? And who gives you academic support when you need help with the math? Who do you go to in the classroom? So what we see here is overall, we see a very high host homophily. Host kids are all connected to each other, which is fine, which is normal, because they have been together more with each other than these refugee kids, right? Before the refugee kids come, they were all friends. So, but what happens is, as the ethnic bias of the teacher increases, the host homophily increases in the friendship, in every measure that we look at. The host connects with each other a lot more. And we don't see this in the refugees. They don't segregate. So this picture is just an exception. In reality, there is no host, there is no refugee homophily. What we see is refugee children trying to be friends with those children, which is consistent with how they internalize these beliefs that they are better. I want to be with them. I need to go and hang out with them. So we don't have that at this stage, So the teacher has a huge impact on this.
You talk about racial behavior, etc. As a teacher, I think I reinforces interest on trust or contact, which might be terrible as well.
Right.
With no cost
There's cost on the refugees. There's going to be cost coming.
This is reported by
This is reported friendships. Yeah.
right.
Reported friendships. So you're right. Cohesion, like Danish are cohesive. But what happens to them when you have 5 million refugees come? So that is the important. I'm talking about the inter-ethnic cohesion. Right? The host is becoming more cohesive and more closely knitted, but that's not what we need for a cohesive society, ethnically diverse cohesive society. You want all of them to connect with each other. So then you don't want to see segregation. Segregation brings, for example, this bullying of the refugee children. So as the teacher's ethnic bias increases, incidence of bullying, being bullied of the refugee children increases. Right? They gang up on them when they're close, when they're closely together, right? And this also affects their learning of the local language. So as the teacher ethnic bias increases, refugees' test scores for Turkish go down. And I'm going to show you that the next study here is this is very consistent with what we see is how the kids learn language. Kids don't learn language by listening to you giving grammar lessons. They learn the language by playing with the other ones. So you put them together, they start playing football, that's how they learn. That's how they learn Turkish. That's how they learn the local language. And what's happening here is when they're segregated, they don't integrate, they don't learn the local language. Yes?
When a kid is bullied, who reports to whom? Because
they report to us.
okay, no, because if the teacher ethnic bias is a matter of, say, hostility towards the kid, then that may have even been a lower band estimate.
Yeah, possible.
You know, because if I'm bullied and my teacher is very hostile,
I may not even report. Yeah. I may even think that I deserve it in this whole internalized horrible beliefs, right? So what we see as a mechanism, and then there's some transmission of teachers' bias to kids, but strangely, just to the refugees. Refugees become more ethnically biased towards the Syrians. Again, these self-defeating beliefs are happening. But we also have a measure of how inclusive the teacher teaches in the classroom. Their practices, right? For example, we ask the kids in this group, of course, who is teacher's favorite children, favorite students? who is the favorite, who gets most attention. At this age, I have to tell you, I've been doing this for almost 15 years. At this age, they are very truthful. Later on, things change. When they become teens, they start not want to answer questions and they don't want to give you the truth, especially bullying. Bullying, they give you everything. I mean, so-and-so hits me, so-and-so hit me. They tell you everything at this age. But later on, it's not cool to say anything about bullying in middle schools and high schools. So we were very lucky here. Another thing we have is the spatial segregation, which was really, I went to primary school in 1970s. It was still the same. The teachers segregate the bad student and the good student spatially. The bad one goes, have you had any experience like that? The bad kid goes at the back. Teacher doesn't want to interact with the bad kid. The teacher doesn't want to see the bad kid. It was exactly the same my time. So anybody, look at them, problem kids at the back. Nobody wants to do anything to do with them, and they tend to be more likely to be refugees. So basically, what happens here, if you're a kid like that, I was briefly like a kid like that, I know. So if you're a kid like that, not only the teacher, but the other kids don't want to interact with you. So this is another channel that the teacher actually influences the socialization choice of the kids. If the teacher doesn't like you at this primary school level, no one wants to be friends with you. If the teacher thinks you're a good kid, and then teacher gives you a lot of duties, go do this, go do that, then everybody wants to be friends with you. This is the primary school structure, actually. So what we see here is one of the channels is student ethnic bias toward refugees, and the refugees are much less likely to be teachers' favorite, obviously, and that they are much more likely to sit at the very back of the classrooms away from the teacher's attention. So, yeah.
Is the teacher's favorite defined by the teachers themselves or by the
kid says, yeah. But once we found out they tell the truth a lot, we asked about their parents and stuff, that they were, did they hit you, did they do, and they were much more accurate than the parents themselves in terms of parent surveys. So we actually leveraged that as well. So teachers are important. Teacher selection is important. There's not much we can do about the teacher selections. I tried. Unions are very, very strong. Even to test them just didn't work at the interview stage, right? But what can we do with the existing stock? And then we find out that the majority of them are willing to try to change this. Majority of them were shell-shocked when we actually showed this to them, right? I could change this. I didn't know. I didn't know I was doing this. So actually we could change this. So what we did was we created an educational intervention, a structured curriculum, but mostly pedagogical in nature. We gave them a guideline to be how to build a cohesive classroom, cohesive environment, without making ethnicity an issue at all. Don't even mention it. So at this age, the kids don't like to be called Syrian or Kurdish or Turkish or anything. They just don't like those labels at all, right? So like the one thing to do is just stop doing that. And then we prescribe activities and games to increase the bonding. And we did this by pushing one single trait. And that trait is called perspective taking, some call cognitive empathy, some call emotional intelligence. So basically, it is the main driver, according to psychologists, the main driver of how social, how nice, how pro-social we are, right? So if we have the ability to understand thoughts and feelings of the others, or put the effort to do so, we are more likely to be pro-social, less likely to be aggressive and violence-prone. So this is distinct from the empathetic concern itself. Like it's not the empathy that you feel somebody suffering and you feel the suffering. It's just an emotional reaction to it. But this one is a cognitive process. It recruits different neural mechanisms in the brain. So this is like a cognitive in the sense that it's a slow thinking trait. So you can teach that. You can actually train that part of your brain to understand the other. This is exactly what we did in this intervention for a whole year. We taught the teacher how to do this, yeah.
So the question, like the previous stuff that you were showing, did you do an intervention where you tell teachers about their bias? Like,
No. These teachers did not know about the other work.
I see, but you think
That's a separate work.
right, that work, like you said, teachers also try to show that result. Did you consider an intervention where you
Just showing them,
telling them?
we are considering it in Italy now.
I see.
Yeah, just showing them a network map, and this is what you see, and see what the teacher does. Yeah, we are doing it in Italy. But here,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
This kind of intervention, is it done once the refugee kids have learned some Turkish, or maybe at the very beginning?
Some learn, some know Turkish, some still don't know. They're still coming. This is 2018 stuff. Okay, so the curriculum was given, and then it was, again, no ethnicity whatsoever, just understanding the other, even understanding the cat. Okay, so it's not just the humans. So understanding the other person when you actually have an action, think of the action that the other person might be feeling. So they watch videos about, like, we hurt the same way, we are happy the same way, and all that stuff, and slowly thinking. So it was a very intensive one. And then, and this is about, for example, doing about the skirt and all that stuff. They had a lot of exercises like this. It was a whole year intervention. It was a class randomized controlled trial for 80 schools. 40 of them got this, 40 of them didn't. And these are all third and fourth grade children in that region that I was talking to you about. About at the time, at the baseline, it's 16% of them were refugees. It become 18 if they end on.
So you do this with teachers and students both, or just
teachers? We just train the teachers and send them to the classroom to cover the curriculum. Okay. So in the end, the program had very nice short-term effects. In 2019 end-line, 60% decline in high-intensity violence that is recorded by the school. And that's reported by the school that's sent to the centralized ministry. Right? And these are high intensity in the sense that these are primary schools, but there's still high intensity stuff is happening. The kid hit the other kid and then push the kid down the stairs, and the ambulance comes. Sometimes police come. We get the stoning too. You know, all these things. These are violent. They are violent kids, the little ones. Okay, so 60% decline, and at the time, and then also 60%, about 60% decline in the being a victim. Because what happens here again, you notice that in the primary school, if you ever study bullying or violence, perpetrator and victim are not really two different kids. One day I perpetrate, the other day I'm a victim. So, but that changes in the middle school and high school. They become the real perpetrators emerge there. So here, by declining the violence, we also decline the possibility of, we reduce the possibility of being a victim to a violence. So a significant decline in social exclusion. So the ethnic segregation measure that I was showing you, the friendship across ethnicities, increased significantly. So the host children had more refugee friends and vice versa. And the loneliness of the refugee children, which was really high at baseline, got down quite a bit. So with the incentivized tasks, trust increased, all types of trust, interpersonal trust, the trust of me to my classmates, also impersonal trust, the trust that I don't know, the trust toward the kids I don't know. So that's very important because that's the one thing important for the economic prosperity. Trusting the others that you don't know. So cooperation and altruism increase. What was really nice is the progress in learning host country's language, Turkish. So by making them friends, you improve Turkish. The curriculum had nothing to do with teaching kids anybody Turkish. So, but it improved Turkish by just simply playing together.
Did you check the teachers' ethnic bias at the end line?
Yeah.
So you have
Got down. It did get down. So we were thinking of measuring them again 2020. We couldn't, but last October we went again as soon as the schools opened, and not surprisingly, a large number of refugee children already disappeared from the system. The COVID really hurt them. So we don't know where they are, maybe in different cities, maybe some of them may return to Syria, some of them are in the seasonal work already. But that was to be expected. But there's a lot more refugee children in the schools than we left in 2019, for sure, right? And it's completely stabilized in Turkey now because we don't have any influence anymore. Trust dissipated, but reciprocity remained. So they don't trust that much anymore, but once they are trusted, they reciprocate nicely. So they reciprocate the generosity. And the probability of forming interethnic friendship is still high, and perspective taking ability remains significantly high, and the effect of Turkish language ability completely gone because they have been in Turkey for a long time, and they all speak Turkish. Now, I think they're using Arabic right now. Their Turkish is dominating. Yeah.
So there's two things. One is the selection effect, the large number of years. So if you're looking at the effect on the course.
No, both. We do have the refugees. So the original kids we had.
Exactly. So are you thinking that there might be attrition and selection?
There is attrition by the refugees, some in the host, but the attrition is very similar in host control. It has nothing to do with our treatment.
So you see how some treatment effects might disappear because of selection on both sides.
Right, the selection of those organs. Like we see that, for example, mostly girls disappeared.
So I'm thinking of the last one, for example, the Turkish language ability. If it's only those who spoke Turkish anyway who are still there and the others left, then that would
explain exactly. So we don't know what happened to the girl who was pushed into marriage on the Syrian side, for example. We lost those in the system. We completed those. I don't lose those kids in the system because they are somewhere registered. But these guys, they're not registered. I lose them. I lose them for good. Right? So unfortunately, that's the downside of working with the refugees. Finally, I just want to tie it back to why this is important. I'm going to make an argument that this is important for economic prosperity. You need to harness social psychology in schools. You need to do this in the very low socioeconomic segment. You need to do it especially when you have a shock to your ethnic diversity. So when we played the trust game, impersonal trust game, was a trust game that everybody knows, right? So we give the kids gifts, 4 token gifts. We ask them, they are anonymously matched with someone outside. They don't know the kid. How many of your tokens would you send to the kid? We will multiply it with 3 if you send any. And then we ask this alien how many you would send back. That's the reciprocity measure. This is a very simple trust game. What happens with this trust game, I told you already that these kids become very trusting to even those who didn't know. They didn't know, right? This is impersonal trust, which is required for prosperity, for economic development, and the reciprocity. So the treated children also became more optimistic about the state of the world they knew. They actually expect more from other people than actually trust them. So we did something horrible to them. So we train them and we make them more trusting, more pro-social in a world that is so violent, that is so bad, right? And that's exactly what we're going to see here, that we looked at, because we had the treated kids, untreated kids, we could create countries with them. Countries where the trusting kids are treated and receiving kids are treated. Countries with trusting kids are treated, the receiving kids are untreated, bad guys, and going like this. You know what I mean? So it's like And then this is kind of, I'm just going to call it a nice, just world, that everybody is pro-social or more pro-social than autarky, and a community where the real world, we train some of them and we throw them in the bad world, and the community where both are untreated, which is autarky before we actually started this work, and the community where the senders were untreated, but this is not an important point. So I'm just going to look at this first. We can calculate the wealth of every nation and the inequality in every nation. Okay? And this is exactly what we do. So what happens with the trust is they get rich, they're real gifts. Yeah, we give them real gifts. So you can actually look at their wealth. Right? So more trust in the community, by design, more wealth. But the distribution, the inequality will depend on the reciprocity. Okay? So you can have very trusting kids. If it's not reciprocal, you will have inequality. Okay? Or you can have like no trust whatsoever, and you will have no inequality. So imagine an extreme case. No one sends anybody anything. You are equal, but you're poor. In a world that everybody sends everything, and people really nicely reciprocate, then you have Scandinavia, rich and equal, and you have a case where people trust, and the trust is now returned, no distribution, no redistribution going on. You may have wealth, you do have wealth, but inequality like US. Okay?
Where is the wealth coming from?
The trust gain. So when you engage in a transaction, we multiply it with 3. So we create the wealth. Right?
The fourth group is what's interesting, right? Because these guys
Yeah.
don't receive anything, maybe they learn.
Yeah, they probably. So the long-term results were good for that. Long-term results, they revert back to autarky. And they did a little bit. So I trust, I don't get the trust back, I'm going back to autarky, right? So this is exactly what happened. So in the just world and the unjust world, Scandinavia and the US, they're equally wealthy. Okay, because they trust, right? But then if you look at the maximum and minimum wealth, rich are rich in both worlds, more than the autarky, but the poverty is less in the good world, where everybody is treated. Inequality is the same. Unjust world is worse than the autarky, that we interfered and we created inequality, basically. And the just world, where everybody is treated, is a good world in terms of both being prosperous and also equal. Okay, so I'm just going to end. The real world is unjust by design. The real world, we make them trusting and match them with the reality, and they lost big time. They trust too much and they earn less as a result. They sent the tokens, they didn't really get back much. The control kids were smarter, I'm not trusting, so I'll keep the money or the gift. So what happens here, what we learn here is, it is not like developing patience or grit or teaching them more math or Turkish. If you're trying to improve the social skills, if you're trying to make them more empathetic, more cooperative, more pro-social, it has to be at the scale. Because it has externalities. Pro-social psychology has externalities. If I'm trusting, the world needs to be trusting. And more needs to be more reciprocal. So this is what we learn from this exercise. To build a prosperous societies, you can actually do something in the public school system. You can teach the children, especially at the low socioeconomic. So what's not going to work is me teaching my child to be altruistic and nice to the others, if the world out there is not like that. This is basically what we show here. So this has to be at scale. This should be accessible to all to create a just world. So this is how I'm going to end this talk. And thank you for listening.